latest technological innovations today.
And you don't have to pay.
Expert panels with advanced degrees are sure to satisfy your curiosity.
Did we mention it's free?
And if you think you'll find a better time than this, then come on down and test your hypothesis. Cause you're gonna learn a lot if you wanna stay down at the Science Cafe.
Hello again, and welcome to Science Cafe, New Hampshire for our July 2021 event. My name is Rick Irving, and although the panel is joining us from New Hampshire tonight, I am joining from North Carolina, where I am visiting with my daughter and my son-in-law, and my daughter Courtney happens to be here right now.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so it is my pleasure once again to be your host and moderator for tonight's session entitled Cyanobacteria in New Hampshire Waters. We need to be aware that our favorite recreational areas may be impacted by toxic algae bloom. Here we find ourselves in the middle of a nice warm summer season, and most of us look forward to taking advantage of our beautiful lakes and waterways. Cyanobacteria are a group of prehistoric bacteria which is found naturally throughout the world in slow-moving or still waters. This bacteria can produce toxins that can both pose a health risk to humans and animals. Tonight, we will address what causes the overactivity of cyanobacteria to reach toxic levels, ways we can improve the safety and overall health of New Hampshire lakes and waterways, and health risks associated with waters containing cyanobacteria. At Science Cafe, we strive to bring together the public with the expert panel and provide a forum for an exchange of intelligent ideas based on scientific discussion. This is achieved by using the questions submitted by you, the audience, to our assembled panel as the basis for the interaction. Before I get into our introduction of our expert panelists and our Q&As, I have a couple of procedural comments for the audience. Please use the comments section of Facebook or YouTube, whichever you are using to watch us tonight, to directly submit your questions to us. Our colleagues will collect them and forward them along to us to get answers from the panel. Please be succinct with your questions, and if you would, purely for general interest purposes only, please include your name and location. You may start submitting your questions for the panel starting right now and continue throughout tonight's session. As always, we will get to as many of your questions tonight as our time permits. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce the panel. Okay, so our first panelist is Andrea Lamoreaux. Andrea has a BS in Environmental Science and Policy from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and a master's in Environment Management and Water Resources from Duke. Isn't that a little like going to Yale first and then Harvard, the big rivalry here? Okay. And she is a 2016 graduate of the Leadership in New Hampshire program. She is the current president of the New Hampshire Lakes Organization, and she's coordinated the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Volunteer Lake Assessment Program. And in her spare time, I don't know how you find spare time, she enjoys kayaking, swimming, camping, and hiking with her husband and daughter. Andrea, take a few minutes and tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I am the president of New Hampshire Lakes, a statewide nonprofit organization simply working to keep all of New Hampshire's 1,000 lakes clean and healthy. When I'm not working for Clean and Healthy Lakes, I'm enjoying them. My family has a home on Lake Sunapee, and my husband's family has a home up on Seneca Lake in New York. So I'm just so thankful and amazed that I've been able to make a career out of something that I love, and I'm really excited to be here tonight with you and with Amanda and with Rosemarie to talk about something that's really, really important to all of us, particularly right now. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure having you join us tonight. Next, we have Amanda McQuaid. Amanda has her BS in marine biology and MS in zoology and a PhD, all from the University of New Hampshire. She has been researching lake biology and cyanobacteria for over 15 years. She's worked as an environmental scientist for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services for over 5 years, and she is the program coordinator for a newly developed harmful algal cyanobacterial bloom program. That is a mouthful. Thank you for joining us, Amanda. Please tell the audience about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here tonight. And it is a pleasure to be here with all of you again. Well, yes, that pretty much sums it up. I spent a lot of time at the University of New Hampshire studying cyanobacteria. So I'm very pleased to be here this evening to talk about my favorite subject. It's, I would consider my life's work and passion, certainly. I know people might question why, but I'm very excited to talk tonight about this subject. I'm also with New Hampshire DES, and we are getting a lot of blooms this summer, but we're sort of seeing a strange pattern, with all the rain we're seeing. It's been sort of a different summer, but we are experiencing blooms, and July is pretty much the peak time for these events.
Great. Thank you for joining us tonight. And we have Rosemarie Rung. Rosemarie has a Bachelor of Science from University of New Hampshire in biochemistry, and she has prior experience in professional positions of analytical chemistry and public affairs. She sits on the steering committee for the development of the Lake Kanasatka Watershed Management Plan in Moultonborough, New Hampshire, and she is our first two-time panelist for Science Cafe. Welcome, Rosemarie. Tell the audience about yourself.
Thank you very much, Rick. About 6 years ago, my husband and I bought a seasonal cottage on Lake Kanasatka in Moultonborough, and it's a great spot for family and friends to gather during the summer. We really enjoy the water, kayaking, swimming, boating, and I've become more protective and more aware about environmental issues from my experience on the lake. And also I've served on, as a state legislator, I've served on the Aquatic Invasive Species Commission and also on the Resources, Recreation, and Development Committee for the New Hampshire House. So it's an area that I'm really interested in. I'm learning a lot about, both in the policy area, but also as a seasonal lake resident.
Great. Thank you, Rosemarie. Now we are going to get to our questions, and we'll continue with the questions for pretty much the remainder of the show. I'll just have a few comments at the end, so here we go. First question is for Rosemarie. What is cyanobacteria, and what are your experiences with it in the New Hampshire lakes?
Well, Rick, if you asked me that question a year ago, I would not have been able to answer it. But last August, being at the lake, we noticed it turned green. And it was really green throughout the lake. There wasn't anything floating on the lake, but the color changed. And we had it tested. And thankfully, with Dr. McQuaid's help, it was identified as a cyanobacteria bloom, a lake-wide bloom. And there was an advisory issued, which meant people were not recommended to go into the water. And by the time we figured out, got the word out about it, people had already become sick, pets had become sick, one dog had died. It was really serious, and it took us by surprise because residents of Lake Kanasatka, we've always been proud of the pristine nature of our lake. It's very clear. It's a very good, high water quality, and this caught us all by surprise. We were shocked, and fortunately, we got into motion and we organized and got the word out. New Hampshire Lakes gave us some great material to distribute. But we've become very, very cognizant of the importance of protecting the lake. But cyanobacteria, it is a bacteria. Sometimes it's referred to as blue-green algae, but it's really a bacteria, and it releases a neurotoxin, which can cause death. It's even been linked to ALS. So it's something we have to take very seriously and be able to recognize it and take precautions when we see it.
Great. Thank you, Rosemarie. Andrea, next question is for you. Is cyanobacteria found in freshwater only, or does it affect beaches at the ocean?
Good question. As you mentioned in your introduction, cyanobacteria are some of the oldest living organisms on our planet. They're truly responsible for basically manufacturing the air in our atmosphere. So they are widespread in freshwater and the oceans. I do think, though, here in New Hampshire, we're not finding cyanobacteria blooms being problematic at our ocean beaches. It's really our freshwater lakes that are really experiencing the cyanobacteria blooms. And I'm sure Amanda can chime in this. She knows a little bit more about the biology. But DES, Department of Environmental Services, certainly does monitor our oceans for other types of bacteria. And sometimes we have what's called red tide. And if anyone's familiar with harmful algal blooms in oceans, it's probably red tide, which is a little different from cyanobacteria, but also something that, you wouldn't want to swim in, you wouldn't want to have your pets in. But primarily cyanobacteria here in New Hampshire is a lake thing, a lake issue that we're dealing with.
Great, thank you. And Amanda, what is the difference between blue-green algae, green pond scum, and cyanobacteria outbreak?
Well, very good question. I'm tempted to say they're all the same, but no, they're truly, we can look at a pond and it could look really green, scummy, or colorful in different ways. But those colors that we see represent little microscopic organisms that could be cyanobacteria, but it could also be other living things that are green or other colors. We used to call cyanobacteria blue-green algae, and we still like to use that term because people are more familiar with the term blue-green algae. As Rosemarie mentioned, it's not truly an algae. It's a bacteria that sort of acts like algae in plants, that they use the sun's energy to grow, but they also behave as bacteria. So I guess you could say cyanobacteria are blue-green algae and they're green pond scum. But green pond scum doesn't necessarily mean that it's cyanobacteria.
Okay, and we have I see our first question comes from Courtney from North Carolina. I presume this is the same Courtney that's sitting across the table from me right now. The question is, what are the ecological benefits to cyanobacteria?
Well, I guess I could comment on that unless someone else wants to chime in. Well, there are a lot of ecological benefits, I guess you could say, to cyanobacteria. They are a natural part of the ecosystem, and they've been around forever. They're not only in fresh water, they are in the air, they're in the soil, they're on the trees. They're really a very ubiquitous organism. There are also little organisms that eat cyanobacteria, and they are not suffering the toxic effects of these organisms. They also have chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is, a good thing for a lot of organisms for nutrients and energy. And in fact, if you look at the health food supplies, you should also be aware that blue-green algae might be added to certain health food supplements. Not always tested for toxins. I wouldn't recommend those options, but definitely if you ever go grab a smoothie and get a big boost of a green spirulina, that's certainly cyanobacteria. So that they are a nutritious bottom of the food chain organism for some creatures.
And you said some of those creatures consume the cyanobacteria and they don't suffer the ill effects. What might those creatures be?
Oh, there's so many things. I did do a lot of research on food webs, so I will try not to go off on a tangent here. But we have what we call phytoplankton and zooplankton. So phytoplankton are the microscopic plants, and the zooplankton are the microscopic animals. And so there are very tiny little animals in the water when you're swimming. I hate to tell you that, but they are. And they consume these and they get energy from them. What we also know, though, is that some of them are able to accumulate toxins and pass that up through the food web. So it might benefit, the lower food chain organisms, but there's a lot of different food webs and different connections that, do benefit from cyanobacteria.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Stacy Samochi back in New Hampshire. What are the human and pet symptoms that manifest after ingestion? Rosemarie, I think you're muted.
I can speak for the experience of people on Lake Kanasatka.
Please.
The puppy that was impacted got very ill, just very weak, lethargic, didn't want to drink, didn't want to eat. I'm not sure if he was vomiting, but the owners knew right away something was wrong and took him to the vet, and they determined it was from exposure to cyanobacteria in the lake. Of the people that were sick, they got headaches, also weakness, felt like they were coming down with the flu. So that's just my anecdotal information about the symptoms we witnessed from people at the lake.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in that my mother-in-law, who actually lives in New York on a lake there, she had cyanobacteria exposure, and very similar to what Rosemarie said. She fell into the lake, she had a cut, it got into her cut, and she got, skin irritation, and then she got nausea, gastrointestinal stuff. So it was, she was feeling pretty lousy for a while.
Okay, so yeah, and Stacy's question said ingestion, but so you can get the bacteria without swallowing the water, right? So you talked about a cut, and it's just exposure to the water. Will that cause a problem, or can it cause a problem?
Yeah, there's a good wide range of symptoms associated with cyanobacteria. Actually, I know some people are more sensitive and get skin irritations. A lot of people do explain getting ear and eye irritations, and that's really just from the cyanobacteria itself. The toxins don't permeate your skin necessarily. They irritate the skin, but you can breathe it in and have effects. You can consume it and have effects as well. There's a lot of research looking at the aerosol effect as well. So it's a wide range.
Wow, very interesting. Thank you. All right, our next question comes from Heather Bauman-Gass. Can you talk about what causes cyanobacteria blooms and why we are seeing them so much more frequently?
Sure.
Well, I'll chime in.
Please.
At least from the experience that we had is last year, our water quality, our water clarity was very good. You could see so far into the depth of the lake, and we had a warm spring, and so the clarity of the water and the warm spring allowed sun to penetrate deeper and warm the water quicker. So it kind of set the stage. Also, we believe that increased phosphorus from runoff, from sediment disruption, provided the food for the cyanobacteria. So it was sort of a perfect storm along with the drought we had. We didn't have a lot of water replacement. We didn't have a lot of oxygenation of the lake. And so all of these components just set the stage for the cyanobacteria to go into overdrive and create those blooms.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that perfect storm. I like to use that term also because even our cleanest lakes do sometimes have blooms, and these organisms live in the lakes. They're not invasive. They're not anything that's new. They might be there and we just never see them. But they undergo this rapid growth, and there's a lot of factors. Just as plants need different nutrients and watering cycles, so do the algae and the cyanobacteria. So, the components of a bloom are usually warming weather and more nutrients. And what we often see in New Hampshire is that after big rain or storm events, a lot of the nutrients get brought into the lake very quickly. And the cyanobacteria really eat it up and use it and grow pretty quickly. Then they also crash very quickly. So the blooms aren't always very long-lived, but every lake is very unique. And you have to really look at the whole watershed to really evaluate what might be happening in this system.
Yeah, and I would add to that, sort of the second half of the question, what can we do, potentially reduce the frequency of these? And as both Rosemarie and Amanda were referring to as nutrients, we think that nutrients, something called phosphorus, increased phosphorus in our waters, is helping to fuel the growth of cyanobacteria. So at New Hampshire Lakes, we help property owners figure out how to live in a lake-friendly way, which essentially means how they can reduce their impact to nutrients, phosphorus coming off of their property and into the lake. And I know a number of folks at Lake Kanasatka, in partnership with our partner, Lake Winnipesaukee Association, are engaged in the Lake Smart program to do just that, figure out the opportunities on their property to reduce phosphorus. And I don't know that we've talked specifically about phosphorus, where it comes from, but it comes naturally from our soils. So anytime soil gets washed into the lake, there's phosphorus. Phosphorus can come from septic systems that aren't functioning properly or are old and outdated and need to be replaced. And another example would be fertilizer. Often fertilizer contains some phosphorus, and we use too much of it. It gets washed into the lake. So there are some simple things that folks can do to live lake friendly and reduce that nutrient input into our lakes.
Okay, thank you. Well, Wendy Cochran, a Lake Kanasatka resident, actually had the question that I think you may have answered. What can we do to prevent the outbreak? I think we've already answered that. Does anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that Andrea really laid it out well. And New Hampshire Lakes definitely has a lot of good resources. So I would echo that you really should check out the Lake Smart guides. We also have a Soak Up the Rain project program with New Hampshire DES, which is really a nice way to evaluate your own yard and see, where are runoff, where is runoff occurring? Where can you maybe plant a buffer zone so that the water doesn't run straight into the lake or into the street, so that it can kind of divert that runoff. There's a lot of different things out there, but I definitely recommend New Hampshire Lakes resources on those too.
And I'd like to add something, Rick. When this happened to us last year, our Lake Kanasatka Watershed Association put together an exploratory committee to look into developing a watershed management plan, and we were successful in getting funding for that. The town of Moultonborough came through for us on a significant portion of the funding, and we've contracted with an environmental engineering firm who's going to be spending the next year. Well, they actually started earlier in the year to really gather some quantitative data on our lake and where are we seeing runoff coming in. In fact, yesterday, a person from DES was up at our lake taking core samples, five different areas of the lake. So we know some of the contributing factors that raise phosphorus level in the lake, but we really want to get some definitive solutions. So this watershed management plan, which will be completed next year, will define specific mitigation activities that we can take on to control that runoff, identify if there's any other things that are going on. One of the things that also may be contributing is just boat traffic. Last year, there were a lot of boats on the lake because of COVID quarantining. And they can, if they're in shallow areas, they can stir up that sediment and bring that phosphorus into the water. So we're really excited about the watershed management plan going on and getting some really good information. And we hope we can leverage that to other lakes in New Hampshire and beyond.
Great. Excellent points. Thank you. Our next question is from Elizabeth Beth Baxon. We were up at Northampton on Sunday, and the signs posted warned that the water was not safe for wading or swimming. Was that because of cyanobacteria?
No, I'll take that because those are New Hampshire DES signs. Yeah, so with the beach program, we are monitoring coastal beaches for fecal indicator bacteria, which is very different than the cyanobacteria. The fecal indicator that we use is Enterococci bacteria at the coast, and we also monitor freshwater beaches for E. coli. So if you see a yellow advisory sign that reads bacteria, that is a fecal indicator organism, and we do post advisories when levels are elevated. The cyanobacteria signs, we are improving those signages, and we're hoping for something new in the future, but they read very similarly to the bacteria signs, but you will see a red advisory sign if there truly is an advisory for cyanobacteria, at least this summer. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Sandy. Does cyanobacteria cause swimmer's ear? Andrea, seems like you'd like to answer that question.
That's a good question. My daughter gets swimmer ear all the time. I'm not aware of that and that connection, but I would probably defer to Amanda on that if she has any insight on that.
There, probably if you're talking about, swimmer's ear, just having sort of an infection of the ear, that can certainly happen from cyanobacteria also. They do cause like ear and eye irritations. So, I don't know if I would have associated with swimmer's ear, but, that's more, you get a lot of water caught in your ear. There's a lot of organisms that can, quickly just live very well and cause an infection. So, it could be anything, but it can happen. It can happen.
Okay, next question. It is from It's Me, CPN. Corrine, is there a way to treat the water to make it safe for use?
Well, I can just quickly comment on that.
Sure.
Yeah, there are a lot of different products out there that claim, get rid of blue-green algae very, very quickly. With a lot of the public water systems, though, the types of treatment that's already in place are usually effective for first removing cyanobacteria cells from the water, and then secondly, trying to reduce the toxicity of those organisms. But if we're talking about in-lake treatment, that is very, very tricky. I will say if you Google this, you'll see promises from every company that it works here, there, and everywhere. It's usually chemical or aeration or some sort of mechanical disruptor that will reduce cyanobacteria. I will say that it is a case-by-case scenario on success for those things, but there are some treatments out there. There's a lot.
Okay.
And I want to add too, Rick, on that
Please.
is the things that Amanda touched upon. Not only can they be very expensive, but they could be short-lived. So it's much more economical and efficient to be able to get to the root cause of what's causing those blooms. I don't want people, because we've been studying this, and I don't want people to think that, there's a quick fix. You can put a quick fix, but it's going to get reversed unless you remove those factors that are contributing to the bloom.
All right, great point. Thank you. Next question, Elizabeth Beth Faxon. Can we get cyanobacteria from eating shellfish?
Well, that's a good question. So cyanobacteria do grow, in oceans and in lakes. Shellfish especially like to filter feed, and so they usually do have lots of cyanobacteria in their bodies. I mean, basically, if you're eating these things, you're not just eating a portion of it, you're pretty much eating the whole organism, and that includes, the stomach and the digestive organs, and that really just is a type of organism that kind of builds and holds on to cyanobacteria. I don't know in the marine environment how toxic they are, but I know you do not want to eat any of the freshwater shellfish in lakes, and including snails or bottom feeders. They do accumulate a lot of cyanobacteria toxins, so you might be exposed to the toxins that way.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have another question that says, can we eat fish caught in lakes with cyanobacteria outbreaks? Sounds like the answer should be, have a steak.
Well, I don't want to take all the questions, but I certainly We don't, with the state, we don't have any rules on fish consumption. Actually, that is true. We don't. We don't know a lot about the bioaccumulation of the toxins to certain fish. We do know in the research, though, that there are certain types and sizes and ages and all of that factor into how toxic a fish might become. Stay tuned. I do know that other countries and some states actually are looking into this more and would probably put an advisory on fish consumption during a bloom. In New Hampshire, though, I could probably just think of a few lakes that are really chronically having cyanobacteria issues. It is more of like a long-term sort of approach to looking at this too. It's not always an acute problem. Toxicity can be chronic, which is also very troubling.
And I just want to add, that was one of the reasons why we went forward with the watershed management plan, because it's easier to address these issues early on rather than having us get into a situation where year after year we're having cyanobacteria blooms. We want to be able to identify what's contributing to those blooms early on so we can remediate it. But I mean, to the person that asked the question, I know New Hampshire Fish and Game has a great website where they talk about fish, because there may not be any restrictions on fish due to cyanobacteria, but there are many restrictions on eating fish from New Hampshire lakes because of mercury. So I would definitely have people go to New Hampshire Fish and Game and look at that. I know pregnant women, I think, are only allowed a few ounces of fish from New Hampshire lakes a month. And I think that goes for children too. So it's not just cyanobacteria we have to be cautious with. There's also other things in lake water that we need to be cognizant of.
Okay. I should let the audience know, one of the things that I found exciting about this particular topic or this particular show was our panelists all know each other and they work together. And I think we're really seeing the benefit of the relationships that they have. So excellent job. Thank you. All right, next question, Steve Corcoran. Question for Amanda. Impact of cyanobacteria on wildlife. Loon chicks, Lake Kanasatka, had a young loon last summer who didn't make it due to medical issues.
Yes, there are a lot of researchers looking at this connection. I will say that there are toxic effects on wildlife, and in the research, it varies from insects all the way up to top predator birds. There was a very interesting study about eagles eating hydrilla that had a symbiotic cyanobacteria on it that was toxic. With loons, though, I know the Loon Preservation Committee is doing tons of work, and I know that there's synergistic effects as well. Speaking of mercury, there's some researchers that show that mercury and cyanotoxins might also be synergistically affecting organisms. So all I can say is that there's a lot of eyes on this topic, and it is concerning, especially if it was odd. If it was an anomaly to lose a chick. Unfortunately, it's very common. The loon survival rate is not that great, and that's why there's so many people dedicated to looking out for them.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Kathy Beam. Is the toxicity to people and animals only present when the bloom is present? Good question.
Yeah, I can kick that off and say, generally we say, look before you leap. If you see the lake and it looks, kind of a funky color, you're not going to want to jump in because it might be a cyanobacteria bloom. But as we talked about earlier, cyanobacteria are pretty much, a big ubiquitous in all of our waters, usually in relatively low levels. And generally speaking, we explain to people if you don't see it, if you don't see a bloom, then it's probably safe. You're not going to need to worry about a toxic event there. So look before you leap for sure.
And even after a bloom is over and the bacteria die off, they can release toxins. And one of the things I've observed is you'll see there'll be the bloom. It'll be that light, bright green scum. It's usually against the windward shore. And then it dies off. And this can happen within a half an hour to an hour. And then there's like this white bubbles, not like a really thick foam, but a lot of bubbles. And then after that, when it clears, I think people are good to go after that. But I want to tell people, I mean, it really is helpful to go to Amanda's website on DES and look at some of the pictures, and New Hampshire lakes as well, because an educated resident or visitor to a lake has the most advantage to protect themselves if they have the knowledge of what these things look like and the life cycle, how they can cycle through.
Great, thank you.
I'll just add, if I could, real quick. It's
Sure.
this. We say a lot that the cyanobacteria release toxins. I mean, they're producing toxins and they're releasing, and they're kind of doing this all the time. And there's just hundreds of different toxins. We're not just talking about one compound. So they all behave very differently. And we don't know a lot about all of them, and we can't measure all of them. And it's just what researchers are learning all the time, that there's new compounds that they create. Some of these toxins can last in the water column for several days. In fact, some people have found weeks to longer. At usually lower levels, but as Rosemarie mentioned, you know, it's not always just blue-green and viable. When they release the cyanotoxins, those toxins can linger in the water. So if you just see a bloom at the beach and then you go and you have lunch and you come back and it's gone, I don't know. I would, you know, maybe just avoid it for the day. But it's, you know, it's fine if you're not swallowing the water. So it really comes back to, you know, protecting those dogs and kids from going in. Make sure that you're vigilant. You're looking, like Andrea mentioned. You really want to look before you go in. Any sort of colors could indicate a growth that you wouldn't want to just jump into anyway.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question from Wendy Cochran. Do water lilies add to the problem?
Well, actually, no. So native lilies are great. And I know people want to pull them and have a beach, but I think the worst thing you can do is pull native weeds and try to add more sand. The water lilies can sort of protect or shadow the water so that the growth is probably not as high. And there's also the competition of nutrients that way. You would, might argue that whenever you go to the lily pads, you see cyanobacteria. It's not that they're growing there; it's that they end up there. They love to just accumulate into coves, and they just basically get caught and run with the wave. They're growing in the lake. They rise up. They're stuck in the surface tension, and then the wind blows them this way and the wind blows them that way, and they end up in some of the lily pads. But I think the lily pads are a good thing to have in moderation, I guess. But yeah, don't pull those.
All right, next question from Michelle Cantara. There's been some new development on the lake near Route 25, and a lot of new landscaping around many of the cottages. Were these major factors in last year's bloom?
I can take that question. We don't know. Those sites had to go through a permitting process. I think people know how to behave responsibly around the lake. I mean, certainly New Hampshire Lakes has done a great job with their Lake Smart program and getting the word out. And we've taken their message to our lakefront owners. But anytime you have any runoff or disruption, which is a risk with development, it's going to increase the nutrient load of the lake. When Amanda was talking about the plants and the water lilies, I mean, I used to pull plants around the lakefront when I didn't know better. But I realize now that they do compete for nutrients, so they'll create more of a balance. And they also keep the sediment in place. I don't have any information about this except anecdotal, but I suspect that maybe a lot of disruption of the sediment is a problem, not just at Lake Kanasatka, but a lot of lakes. We actually see wake boats that can really churn up sediment. So in shallow lakes, they could really do a disruption and bring that phosphorus, that natural phosphorus, back into the water. So I don't think it's just one development, but I think it's an accumulation of a lot of human activity that we can control and that we should control There's going to be some factors we can't control, like the weather, like water temperature. But I think we have to identify those things we can control and take some action.
Okay, well,
And I would just quickly, can I just quickly add to that, Rosemarie, I'm so excited that your group is doing the watershed management plan, because that, plan will help identify, what areas of the watershed, what areas of the drainage area may be contributing, more different pollutants, and then being able to then target those specific areas with more effort to reduce nutrient input. So that's going to be a really important tool in the toolbox there.
great. And follow on to that question, how do wake boats, boats with ballast, contribute to cyanobacteria? And how about jet skis?
I'll quickly comment on that.
Please.
We think that, as Rosemarie said, anytime the lake bottom is disturbed, that the sediment, which has phosphorus in it, gets, mixed into the water column and is adding nutrients into the water column. I will say that is an area of study right now to actually quantify that. And the New Hampshire Lakes, along with a couple other partner groups in New Hampshire and then nationwide, are helping to sponsor a scientific peer-reviewed study done by some researchers in Minnesota to really get a better handle on how, boating activity from different types of boats, including wake boats and regular ski boats and jet skis and personal watercraft, how those different activities, when they're at different depths in the lake and at different distances from the shore, trying to quantify some of that data to then perhaps on the next step, talking about some management activities and how those activities could be done in a lake-friendly way. So the data is currently being crunched, and we're looking forward to seeing that peer-reviewed data.
And one other thing I'd like to add, Rick, is it's not just personal watercraft or wake boats that may be suspect in bringing up sediment, but any type of boat that's creating strong wakes against the shoreline is going to contribute to erosion. It's going to keep, hitting to that shoreline and bringing more soil into the water. So boaters really have to be aware of their wakes and how they are impacting the shoreline, and make sure that they aren't slamming against the shoreline, because they're just going to keep pulling more of that phosphorus into the lake. A couple years ago, there was a study committee through the New Hampshire House that looked at wake boats. It was called the Wake Boat Commission, and they did identify some of the impacts from wake boats. And one of those was a possible contributing factor into cyanobacteria blooms. And I know the industry is aware of it. I know they're responding, particularly because of aquatic invasive species can be easily carried through the ballast of wake boats. So I know the industry is on this. It's just that we already have a lot of boats out on lakes that pose that risk. So it's really up to the boater, the operator, to really be hyper aware of the impact their boat is having on the shoreline.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Courtney Irving Wood again, the lady in North Carolina sitting opposite me. If you think you or your pets have been exposed to cyanobacteria, what can we do to combat the symptoms? Should we head to the doctor or a vet?
Yes. The answer is yes. If you think that you've been exposed and you have symptoms, you should go to the doctor and get recommendations, or the vet. Usually it's like a cold or a gastroenteritis like symptoms. And so I think that the treatment is very similar. With some toxins, or they're looking at different amino acid treatments, like serine is supposed to help with the reduction of the BMAA toxicity. There's a lot of different studies out there right now looking into, how to reduce toxicity and toxic effects. But acutely, if you have an upset stomach, or if your dog is ill and you were just swimming somewhere, definitely head to the doctor or vet And with New Hampshire DES, we also encourage you to fill out an illness report form from our website, just to help us tie these events better. We often find that people might spend a week trying to figure out what happened, and then they figure, oh, well, we were at the lake, but a week later, the conditions can be very different, and it can be hard for us to follow up to really determine what's happening. It happens very quickly, but we would really encourage you to fill out an illness report form if you really think that it's tied to that event.
Great, thank you. Our next question, interesting question from Heather Bowman-Gass. How do you get a Live Lake Friendly campaign started in your own community? Is that something New Hampshire Lakes helps with?
Yes, absolutely. If you want to participate in the Lake Smart program, just as an individual, you can just go to our website and take a 10 minutes online survey, and you're going to get a tailored report. As soon as you press submit, that's going to give you sort of a laundry list of your lake-friendly living opportunities. And then when you think you're pretty close to being Lake Smart, then you can invite someone from the local Lake Smart team to come out and take a look at your property and hopefully give you a cool sign that says I'm Lake Smart, and you hang it up so your friends and neighbors see it, and then your neighbors say, hey, how did Amanda get that Lake Smart sign on her property? I want that too. And then also we partner with local groups and train local groups to, New Hampshire Lakes is statewide, but we work with local groups to deliver the program locally. So right now we're working with the Lake Winnipesaukee Association to deliver the Lake Smart program directly in the Moulton Borough area. So if you are from a local community group and you want to get trained to be a Lake Smart team, we will certainly do that. So that's exciting.
Great. Thank you, Andrea.
And I want to add that my husband and I are pursuing Lake Smart certification, and the booklet that New Hampshire Lakes publishes, and it's available online, was extremely helpful. There were things that we didn't really notice that we could improve upon. Just a walkway, leaving some pea stone gravel or some grasses nearby. Making sure we kept the vegetation up. And probably the most important thing is don't fertilize. You don't need to fertilize near a lake. You want to keep the vegetation natural in front of the waterfront. But we actually had Andrea come to our Lake Kanasatka Watershed Association. We had a Zoom meeting, I know it was late last fall. And it got a lot of people really interested. And I think we've had 2 certifications since then, and there's a lot of people in process.
Definitely.
So really, it can start with one person, and just share the information with your neighbors and seek out those neighbors who have certification, because they'll have a lot of helpful tips.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. Well done, Andrea. Next question is from our colleague, Sandy Belknap. When Amanda referred to toxins tied to fecal bacteria at the beach, is that human or animal? Seagulls, ducks, whatever.
Well, I didn't mean to tie toxins to fecal bacteria, but we have advisories for fecal indicator bacteria because they can also just cause some of the same symptoms like gastroenteritis and a whole bunch of different things, actually. And the indicator bacteria are just that. They indicate waste is present. And so that is animal borne. That's usually a mix of human and animal waste in the water. But there are organisms at the beach that can be toxic. We monitor that with our shellfish program. We have a harmful algal bloom program that monitors our shellfish beds for E. coli and for some of the marine harmful algal blooms, such as red tide and other types that can also be toxic. So those beach bacteria at the coast are really just to let you know that there's high levels of fecal indicator organisms that indicate the waste level is a little bit high there. And that can be natural, just ducks swimming by, seaweed is accumulating. It can also be that it's like 100 degrees and there's 1,000 people around you, but they don't produce toxins in the way that cyanobacteria do.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and I think is on a lot of people's minds. Has the recent rainy weather this summer created more risk for cyanobacteria outbreaks, or has the wet conditions improved conditions?
Well, I'll chime in just from my experience. It's a double-edged sword, Rick, because with a lot of rain, you get a lot of runoff. And so you're carrying those nutrients into the lake. But then the water helps dilution. When I was working as a chemist, we kind of had a phrase, dilution is a solution. It's not always a solution, but normally when you have a rainstorm, you're breaking things up, you're adding more water, so you're diluting those nutrients so they're not as available to the bacteria. And also in a rainstorm, you're also introducing more oxygen because you're getting more interaction between the water and the atmosphere. So it can be a good thing, but depending on the level of runoff, it could be a bad thing.
Okay. Next question, a very important question to follow up to Rosemarie. Rosemarie mentioned links to ALS. Can you be more specific? Is there a causative data or just correlation?
Well, I would recommend go to, just do a search on ALS cyanobacteria. I know Dartmouth is doing a lot of research on that, and I don't want to paraphrase or make a statement about any conclusions that they've reached. I don't even know if they have any, and I believe UNH is working on that research too. We had a veterinarian speak at the town of Moultonborough meeting, the town meeting where we were seeking partial funding for this. And he was aware of the research, and it just got people's attention because sometimes we don't think about that one exposure. If we don't see an effect right away, it's hard to understand that there may be an effect later. And but there's certainly enough information, enough links that this research has been ongoing.
Great.
Yeah,
thank you.
I could add to that just very quickly because this is a very complicated topic. And I was involved with some of that UNH research that Rosemarie mentioned. Dartmouth Hitchcock is actively researching this connection. And of course, there is a genetic component to ALS. But we're also finding that this compound called BMAA is a neurotoxin and that it can cause ALS-like symptoms. And there is a very famous sort of food web example in Guam, where Chamorro tribesmen were consuming a very specific food web diet and found that this level of BMAA was biomagnifying to the humans and causing ALS. And that's kind of the stem of that whole conversation. But in New Hampshire, those researchers, Dartmouth researchers, Elijah Stomel specifically and his group, they are finding that there's higher rates of ALS in certain regions in northern New England. And so it's definitely worth looking into because that compound BMAA has been linked to causing just disturbing the neurons in a human body.
Great, fascinating. Thank you, Amanda. Next question. What is the largest known bloom in history and how big was it?
Well,
I don't know if this is the largest one, but the thing that comes to my mind is in when the Great Lakes bloom. I know Lake Erie, has. Well, I know this because I was flying over the country during July a couple of summers ago, and I looked down and you could just see Lake Erie, and it was like the whole bottom third of Lake Erie was just bright green. So I know, that's a reoccurring problem in the Great Lakes, and I would say that the surface area of those blooms, in Lake Erie in particular, can be rather large. I don't know what the record is though.
Yeah, I don't know either. I would say maybe some of the China lakes, Lake Tahoe, I believe it's called. There's a lot of research on that lake out in China. But I would say, yeah, Lake Erie definitely comes to mind, especially because of its multi-use and just it reaches so many different people in that, a few years ago, they definitely needed to give people bottled water. You don't want to boil water when there's a cyanobacteria bloom. That actually helps the toxins become more available. And so that was a very big deal for the United States. So I would mark that for United States. But this is a global problem. And there are some very large lakes out there that have massive blooms that have been going on for years.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you. Next question is, how fast can a bloom grow?
Well, I've seen it grow within minutes. I was having a cup of coffee on my dock and I saw a little bit of green scum and I'm like, oh my gosh, is that a bloom? And just before my eyes, it probably went from 1 square feet to probably 9 square feet. It was amazing how fast it went. And then in about a half an hour to an hour, it like went away. It's just incredible how the behavior of them are. I don't know if that's typical. I'm sure Amanda can give some better information, but that was just what I witnessed.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say whatever you witness is correct because they can be very slow growing. We have these mats that grow at the bottom of lakes that are very slow growing. It depends on the type. Like, again, they're not plants, but they're sort of like they behave like plants. So they require different nutrients and temperatures and different conditions overall that can help them grow very fast within minutes to hours. Other types grow very, very slowly. So that can be very difficult to know. However, you know, what Rosemarie experienced was a lot of the growth that came from the lake ended up just blowing onto her shoreline. And that can quickly become a very toxic situation, which is really why DES issues advisories and alerts. We want you to be on the lookout because the conditions can just change so rapidly.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to our time, so this is going to be the last audience question. I'll have one more for you after that. The last audience question, are there certain detergents or chemical runoffs into lake water that are more apt to create cyanobacteria outbreak? And does the use of what's perceived as safe, such as simple green or Dawn detergents or natural corn gluten-based herbicides, runoff reduce the chance for outbreaks?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, certainly there are, you know, if you being lake friendly is using, you know, phosphorus-free detergents in your home, you know, minimizing the use of manufactured cleaning products and, you know, reverting to, you know, natural products, you know, vinegar and baking soda can go a long way. I would say, you know, the most lake friendly thing to do is to not use detergents, fertilizers, cleaners, you know, near the lake, and minimize the use of those in your home, especially if you're on a septic system. You know, gets into the groundwater and eventually into the lake. You know, if you do want to go to the store and buy your detergents and your cleaning products, you know, make sure to read the labels and anything that says phosphate of any sort, you know, you want to avoid that, purchasing that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Great. Okay, so as we close out this evening's session, I have one more question for each of the panelists, and the question is this. If you want the audience to take away just one thing from this Science Cafe, it would be what? It could be emphasizing something you've already said. It can be, you know, you were anticipating or expecting a question or hoping for a question that we never got to, or anything in between. So, Amanda, what would the one thing be for you?
I'll try to keep it to one thing. No, I would say, you know, just we don't want to scare you. I know we talked about a lot of scary things, I guess, and, you know, and everything is bad, but these things are natural. Blooms happen. You know, it's better just to know what they are and to avoid it. I always compare it to poison ivy or a venomous snake. You know, if you know what it is and you stay away, you're going to be okay. But what I also think it highlights is that, you know, it kind of makes you think about the lake in a different way. It also, you know, makes you wonder what you can do better. And I think all of that is very good for the lakes in so many ways. You know, lastly, if you see anything that you think is something weird, just take a photo and send it to me and I'll let you know what we see. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Andrea, how about you? One last thing.
Yeah, I would say, as we've been talking about, cyanobacteria, it's a global issue. It's a huge, big problem. And to not get paralyzed by that. And I think sort of reiterating what Amanda said, we can all take simple actions to reduce our contribution to the problem. And if we all take simple actions to reducing, nutrient loading off the landscape and taking initiative to live in a lake-friendly way, cumulatively, we'll make a difference. And it's not this big, scary problem that we couldn't possibly do anything about. And go to our website, nhlakes.org, and sit down for 10 minutes and take your Lake Smart self-assessment and find out what opportunities you have to live in a lake-friendly way.
Excellent point. Okay, Rosemarie, what would you like people to remember from this session?
Well, I think it echoes what Amanda and Andrea have said, is that just each person can make a difference. So often we don't think we can make a difference. Like, my vote doesn't count, or, I can't change climate change, whatever. But with cyanobacteria and lake health, each person can make a difference. And so just get educated and do what you can. Maybe it's, putting in some type of a swale on your property so it prevents runoff. Maybe it's not feeding duck and geese and making sure animal waste doesn't get close to the lake. But each one of us can do something. And what Andrea said, cumulatively, it makes a huge difference. So just get educated and do what you can. I think that's the best rule or advice I can share.
Great, thank you. For me, this hour flew by. It was a pleasure. And I have a couple of announcements before we sign off. I want to remind our audience that you can rewatch this episode or share it online at our Facebook or YouTube channel, beginning shortly after we say goodnight tonight. And while you are there, we have about 6 years worth of episodes online that you can review. And if you see 1, 2, or 12 things that pique your interest, go ahead and watch those as well. So first, thank you to the audience. Science Cafe really appreciates the time that you take out of your schedule to sit here and watch us. And we particularly appreciate the folks that send us some questions. So thank you very much. And next, Science Cafe would not be Science Cafe without the panel. And we had an extraordinary panel tonight, maybe my favorite. So thank you so much for generously giving us both your time and expertise, and also taking the time to educate us. Really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And when everybody claps, we're all in one room, but the virtual clap. Okay. The next Science Cafe. In August of this year, we will be skipping the Science Cafe. So we will come back and be with you on the third Wednesday of September this year, and we'll continue the 11th season. And I just want to say for everybody, thank you for tuning in. Have a good rest of your evening. Have a good rest of your summer, and good night. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye. Good night.